Close your eyes and let the gentle waves carry you down, down, down into the depths of the ancient sea. The water is warm and blue, shimmering with scattered light from a sun that seems very far away now. Schools of silver fish drift past like living clouds, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the song of whales echoing through the endless blue. You are sinking slowly, peacefully, into the embrace of the ocean, and as you descend, shapes begin to emerge from the darkness below. Towers and temples, streets and statues, an entire city preserved in the silent depths, waiting to share its secrets with those who dream their way to its gates. This is Atlantis, the lost city that has haunted human imagination for over 2,000 years. A civilization of impossible splendor, destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe, swallowed by the hungry sea and hidden from mortal eyes forever. Or so the story goes. Tonight, we explore the greatest mystery of the ancient world. Was Atlantis real? Where might it have been? What happened to its people? And why, after all these centuries, do we still search for a city that may have never existed at all? Let your breathing slow and your body relax as we dive into 99 fascinating facts about Atlantis, the lost city that refuses to be forgotten. Fact 1. The story of Atlantis comes from a single source, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who wrote about it around 360 BCE in two of his dialogues called Timaeus and Critias. These philosophical works were written as conversations between Socrates and other thinkers, and in them, a character named Critias tells a story that he claims was passed down through his family from the great Athenian statesman Solon. According to Critias, Solon learned the story of Atlantis from Egyptian priests during a visit to Egypt around 600 BC. This chain of transmission, from Egypt to Solon to Critias to Plato, spans over 200 years and raises questions about how much the story may have changed along the way. Fact 2. Plato described Atlantis as a powerful island nation located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow passage between Spain and Morocco that connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. According to Plato, Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, suggesting an enormous landmass in the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlanteans had built a magnificent civilization with advanced technology, great wealth, and a powerful military that had conquered parts of Africa and Europe before being defeated by the ancient Athenians. The story ends with the gods punishing Atlantis for its arrogance, sinking the entire island beneath the waves in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. Fact 3. The name Atlantis is derived from the Greek god Atlas, one of the Titans who fought against Zeus and the Olympian gods. After the Titans lost the war, Atlas was condemned to hold up the sky for eternity, a punishment depicted in countless statues showing a muscular figure bearing the heavens on his shoulders. According to Plato's account, the god Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito, who lived on the island that would become Atlantis. Poseidon made her his wife and named the island and the surrounding ocean after their firstborn son, Atlas, who became the first king of Atlantis. The Atlantic Ocean still bears this name today. Fact 4. Plato's description of Atlantis is remarkably detailed, suggesting either a vivid imagination or a source with genuine knowledge of the place. The city was built on a circular island about 5 stadia in diameter, roughly half a mile across, surrounded by alternating rings of water and land. Poseidon himself had created this unusual geography, carving concentric circles around the hill where Cleito lived to protect her from the outside world. The Atlanteans later connected these rings with bridges and tunnels, creating a unique urban layout unlike anything in the known ancient world. Fact 5. The central island of Atlantis, according to Plato, contained a temple dedicated to Poseidon that was covered in silver on the outside, with pinnacles of gold. Inside stood a massive golden statue of Poseidon driving a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses, so tall that his head nearly touched the ceiling. Around him stood 100 Nereids, the sea nymphs, riding on dolphins. The temple was surrounded by golden statues of all the original kings of Atlantis and their wives. The entire scene sounds fantastical, but it reflects the kind of religious architecture that was common in the ancient Mediterranean world, just on a much grander scale. Fact 6. The Atlanteans were said to possess a mysterious metal called Orichalcum, which Plato described as the most precious substance after gold. The walls of the inner citadel were coated with Orichalcum, which sparkled with a red light. What exactly Orichalcum was remains debated. Some scholars believe it was a type of brass or bronze alloy. Others suggest it might have been a copper-gold alloy, or even amber. The word itself means mountain copper in Greek. Whatever it was, the Atlanteans apparently had access to vast quantities of this valuable material, enough to plate entire buildings with it. Fact 7. The island of Atlantis was blessed with abundant natural resources, according to Plato's account. It had forests full of timber, meadows for livestock, and 2 springs, one hot and one cold, that provided unlimited water. The Atlanteans cultivated the land intensively, building an elaborate irrigation system that turned the entire island into a garden of extraordinary fertility. They grew crops twice a year, relying on rain in winter and irrigation in summer. This agricultural abundance supported a large and prosperous population that enjoyed luxuries unknown to most ancient peoples. Fact 8. Elephants roamed the island of Atlantis, according to Plato, a detail that has intrigued researchers ever since. Elephants were known to the ancient Greeks only from Africa and India, so their presence on an Atlantic island would be remarkable. Some have used this detail to suggest that Atlantis might have been located in Africa or connected to Africa by a land bridge. Others point out that elephants or their relatives once lived in many parts of the world, including islands in the Mediterranean, and that Plato might have been drawing on knowledge of these extinct populations. The elephant detail has become one of the most discussed aspects of the Atlantis story. Fact 9. The military power of Atlantis was formidable. Plato describes an army of over 1 million soldiers, along with 10,000 chariots, 1,200 warships, and a navy of over 200,000 sailors. These numbers are almost certainly exaggerated, as they would exceed the military capacity of any ancient civilization we know of. The Roman Empire at its height had an army of only about 500,000 men. But the description conveys the impression that Atlantis was a superpower capable of projecting force across vast distances and threatening even the greatest nations of the ancient world. Fact 10. According to Plato, the Atlantean Empire extended far beyond the island itself. The Atlanteans had conquered parts of Libya as far as Egypt and parts of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia, the ancient name for the region of Italy inhabited by the Etruscans. This made them masters of much of the Western Mediterranean world. Only the ancient Athenians, fighting alone after their allies deserted them, managed to resist and ultimately defeat the Atlantean invasion. The victory of Athens over Atlantis is a central theme of Plato's account and may reveal something about his true purpose in telling the story. Fact 11. The destruction of Atlantis came swiftly and completely. Plato tells us that in a single day and night of terrible earthquakes and floods, the island of Atlantis sank beneath the sea and disappeared. The survivors, if there were any, were scattered across the world, their civilization utterly destroyed. The sea where Atlantis had stood became impassable, clogged with mud and shallow water that prevented ships from sailing through. This detail has been used to argue that Atlantis was located in various shallow seas around the world, though the Atlantic Ocean itself is far too deep for this description to fit literally. Fact 12. The date of Atlantis's destruction, according to Plato, was approximately 9,000 years before the time of Solon, which would place it around 9600 BCE. This date has been one of the most controversial aspects of the story because it places Atlantis at the end of the last ice age, long before any known civilization had developed writing, monumental architecture, or the other features Plato attributes to the Atlanteans. Either Plato's date is wrong, his entire story is fiction, or our understanding of prehistoric civilization is seriously incomplete. Each of these possibilities has its defenders. Fact 13. The question of whether Plato intended his Atlantis story to be understood as history or as philosophical fiction has been debated since antiquity. Plato was famous for using myths and allegories to illustrate philosophical points. His dialogues contain many stories that are clearly not meant to be taken literally, including the famous allegory of the cave in the Republic. Some scholars believe Atlantis was simply another such invention, a fictional example used to illustrate the dangers of hubris and the inevitable fall of corrupt civilizations. Others note that Plato seems to go out of his way to insist on the story's truth, which would be unusual if it were merely a teaching device. Fact 14. Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, apparently did not believe that Atlantis was real. According to the ancient geographer Strabo, Aristotle said of Atlantis that the man who dreamed it up also made it disappear. This dismissive comment suggests that even in the generation immediately after Plato, some people viewed the story as fiction. However, other ancient writers accepted the account as historical truth and speculated about where Atlantis might have been located. The debate between believers and skeptics has continued without resolution for over 2,000 years. Fact 15. The Timaeus dialogue, where the story of Atlantis first appears, is primarily concerned with cosmology and the nature of the physical world. Plato uses the story of Atlantis and ancient Athens to illustrate the relationship between an ideal state and the material world. The ancient Athenians in Plato's account embody his ideal of a well-ordered society, while the Atlanteans represent a civilization that began well but gradually became corrupted by wealth and power. The destruction of Atlantis thus serves as a moral lesson about the consequences of abandoning virtue for material gain. Fact 16. The Critias dialogue, which continues the Atlantis story, breaks off abruptly before the tale is complete. Plato describes the geography, society, and early history of Atlantis in great detail, but never reaches the promised account of the war between Atlantis and Athens, or the final destruction of the island. Whether Plato abandoned the work, whether the ending was lost, or whether the incomplete state of the dialogue is itself meaningful has been debated. The missing conclusion adds to the mystery surrounding Atlantis and has allowed countless writers to imagine their own endings to the story. Fact 17. Solon, the Athenian statesman who allegedly brought the story of Atlantis from Egypt, was a real historical figure who lived from about 638 to 558 BC. He was known for reforming Athenian laws and is credited with laying the foundations for Athenian democracy. Solon did reportedly travel to Egypt, where Greek visitors were welcomed by the Egyptian priests. The Greeks considered Egypt the source of ancient wisdom, and many Greek thinkers claim to have learned from Egyptian priests. Whether Solon actually heard the story of Atlantis in Egypt or whether this provenance was invented to give the story credibility is impossible to determine. Fact 18. Egyptian civilization was already over 2,000 years old when Solon visited, and the priests maintained records going back millennia. The Egyptians had a strong sense of their own antiquity and often impressed Greek visitors with the depth of their historical records. If any ancient people might have preserved memories of a civilization destroyed 9,000 years earlier, the Egyptians would be the most likely candidates. However, no Egyptian records mentioning Atlantis have ever been discovered, and Egyptologists have found no evidence that the story existed before Plato wrote it down. Fact 19. The Pillars of Hercules, beyond which Atlantis was said to lie, marked the edge of the known world for the ancient Greeks. The strait between Spain and Morocco was the gateway to the Atlantic Ocean, which the Greeks called the Sea of Atlas. Beyond the pillars lay mystery and danger. Ancient mariners rarely ventured into the open Atlantic, and those who did brought back stories of strange currents, terrible storms, and vast distances without sight of land. For Plato to place Atlantis beyond the pillars was to locate it at the very limits of possibility, in a region where anything might exist. Fact 20. The first significant revival of interest in Atlantis came in the Renaissance, when Europeans were rediscovering ancient Greek texts and exploring new worlds across the Atlantic. The Spanish conquest of the Americas raised the question of where the Native Americans had come from, and some scholars suggested they might be descended from Atlantean refugees. The resemblance of the word Atlantis to Aslan, the legendary homeland of the Aztecs, seemed to support this theory, though modern linguists consider the similarity coincidental. The association between Atlantis and the Americas would persist for centuries. Fact 21. In 1582, the Spanish historian Francisco López de Gómara suggested that Plato's Atlantis might have been a garbled account of the Americas. He noted that the New World lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules and was larger than Europe and Africa combined, just as Plato had described Atlantis. This theory had the appeal of explaining both the mystery of Atlantis and the existence of complex civilizations in the Americas. However, it required assuming that ancient peoples had somehow crossed the Atlantic and returned to tell the tale, something most historians considered impossible. Fact 22. The most influential book ever written about Atlantis was Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, published in 1882 by the American politician and writer Ignatius Donnelly. Donnelly argued that Atlantis was a real place in the Atlantic Ocean, the original source of all human civilization. He claimed that the mythologies of Egypt, Greece, India, and the Americas all derived from memories of Atlantis, and that survivors of its destruction had spread civilization around the world. Donnelly's book was enormously popular and established the template for almost all subsequent Atlantis speculation. Many of his specific claims have been disproven, but his basic framework remains influential. Fact 23. Donnelly proposed that Atlantis was located on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a massive underwater mountain range that runs down the center of the Atlantic Ocean. When the ridge was first mapped in the 19th century, some speculated that it might be the remains of a sunken continent. However, modern geology has shown that the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is not a sunken landmass, but an area where new oceanic crust is being created as tectonic plates pull apart. The ridge is rising, not sinking, and has never been above water. The geology of the Atlantic Ocean leaves no room for a lost continent. Fact 24. The theory of continental drift, developed in the early 20th century and confirmed by plate tectonics in the 1960s, definitively rules out the possibility of a large continent sinking beneath the Atlantic Ocean in the timeframe Plato describes. Continents do not simply sink. They float on the denser rock of the mantle and move horizontally over millions of years. While coastlines have changed due to rising and falling sea levels, and while earthquakes can cause local subsidence, nothing in our understanding of Earth's geology allows for a continent-sized landmass to disappear beneath the waves in a single day. Whatever Atlantis was, if it existed at all, it was not a mid-Atlantic continent. Fact 25. Some researchers have looked for Atlantis closer to the Mediterranean, in locations that might fit Plato's description if certain details are modified. The island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history around 1600 BCE, destroying the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri and possibly contributing to the decline of Minoan civilization on nearby Crete. The parallels between this catastrophe and the destruction of Atlantis have led some to propose that Santorini was the original Atlantis, with Plato's account distorted by time and retelling. Fact 26. The Minoan civilization, centered on the island of Crete, was one of the most advanced societies of the Bronze Age Mediterranean. The Minoans built elaborate palaces, developed a writing system, and created stunning works of art. Their maritime trade network extended throughout the eastern Mediterranean. To the ancient Egyptians and Greeks who encountered them, the Minoans would have seemed fabulously wealthy and powerful. When their civilization declined after the Santorini eruption and subsequent invasions, they left behind legends of a great island kingdom that had disappeared. These legends might have evolved into the story of Atlantis. Fact 27. If Atlantis was based on the Minoans, then Plato's date of 9,000 years must be an error or exaggeration. The Minoan civilization flourished from about 2,700 to 1450 BCE, not 9,600 BCE, as Plato claims. Some researchers have suggested that the Egyptian priests or Solon, or Plato himself might have confused months for years in the account, which would make Atlantis only 900 years before Solon rather than 9,000. This adjustment would place Atlantis's destruction around 1500 BCE, remarkably close to the date of the Santorini eruption. Fact 28. The island of Santorini, called Thera in ancient times, was dramatically transformed by its volcanic eruption. Before the eruption, the island was roughly circular with a volcanic mountain in the center. The eruption blew out the center of the island, leaving behind the crescent-shaped remnant that exists today, surrounding a water-filled caldera. The circular island with a central mountain matches some aspects of Plato's description of Atlantis, though other details do not fit. The eruption buried the settlement of Akrotiri under volcanic ash, preserving it like a Bronze Age Pompeii and providing valuable archaeological evidence of Minoan life. Fact 29. Akrotiri was a prosperous Minoan town with multi-story buildings, indoor plumbing, and elaborate frescoes decorating the walls. The frescoes depict ships, dolphins, flowers, and scenes of daily life, revealing a sophisticated and artistic culture. Interestingly, no bodies have been found at Akrotiri, suggesting that the inhabitants had time to evacuate before the final catastrophic eruption. Where they went and what happened to them remains unknown. The absence of victims distinguishes Akrotiri from Pompeii, where the sudden eruption trapped thousands. Fact 30. The tsunami generated by the Santorini eruption would have devastated coastal communities throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Waves possibly over 100 feet high may have struck the northern coast of Crete, where the major Minoan palaces were located. Evidence of destruction and abandonment at Minoan sites around this time has been attributed to the tsunami, though other factors such as earthquake damage and subsequent invasion likely played a role. The sudden catastrophe that ended Minoan prosperity could easily have inspired legends of a great civilization destroyed by the sea. Fact 31. Another popular candidate for Atlantis is the Rick-Hat structure in Mauritania, a massive circular geological formation in the Sahara Desert. Also known as the Eye of the Sahara, this feature consists of concentric rings of rock stretching about 30 miles in diameter, superficially resembling Plato's description of Atlantis's ringed geography. Proponents of this theory point out that the Sahara was much wetter in prehistoric times and suggest that the Rick-Hat structure might have been habitable or even surrounded by water. However, geologists explain the structure as a natural formation caused by erosion of uplifted rock, not the remains of a city. Fact 32. The Sahara Desert was indeed green and fertile during parts of the prehistoric period, a phase called the African Humid Period or Green Sahara. From about 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, the Sahara received much more rainfall than today, supporting lakes, rivers, and abundant vegetation. Human populations thrived in regions that are now uninhabitable desert. Rock art from this period shows people swimming, fishing, and herding cattle in areas that are now bare sand. The drying of the Sahara forced these populations to migrate, possibly contributing to the rise of civilization in the Nile Valley. Fact 33. Spain and the surrounding regions have also been proposed as locations for Atlantis. The ancient kingdom of Tartessos, mentioned in Greek and biblical sources, was a wealthy civilization in southern Spain known for its metal trade. Tartessos flourished in the first millennium BCE before mysteriously disappearing from the historical record around 500 BCE. Some researchers have connected Tartessos with Atlantis, noting its location beyond the Pillars of Hercules, its mineral wealth, and its sudden disappearance. Archaeological evidence for Tartessos remains limited, making it difficult to evaluate these claims. Fact 34. In 2011, a team using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar announced that they had found evidence of a large ancient city buried in the marshlands of southern Spain's Diana National Park. The researchers suggested this might be Atlantis or a memorial city built by Atlantean refugees. The location, near the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, fits some aspects of Plato's description. However, subsequent investigation has not confirmed the existence of a major ancient city at this site, and most archaeologists remain skeptical of the Atlantis connection. Fact 35. The Azores, a group of volcanic islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, have sometimes been proposed as remnants of Atlantis. The islands sit on the mid-Atlantic ridge and might seem like the peaks of a sunken continent. However, the Azores are actually growing, not sinking, as volcanic activity adds new rock. They have never been part of a larger landmass, and there is no evidence of human habitation before Portuguese sailors arrived in the 15th century. The Azores are beautiful and mysterious, but they are not the remains of Atlantis. Fact 36. The Caribbean has also been suggested as a possible location for Atlantis, particularly the shallow waters around Cuba and the Bahamas. In the 1960s, divers discovered what appeared to be an underwater road made of large rectangular stones off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas. The Bimini Road, as it became known, sparked excitement among Atlantis hunters, who saw it as evidence of a lost civilization. However, geologists have determined that the formation is natural beach rock that fractured into regular shapes as it formed. The Bimini Road is a fascinating geological feature but not evidence of ancient construction. Fact 37. Antarctica has been proposed as the location of Atlantis in some fringe theories. Proponents suggest that Antarctica was ice-free and inhabited by an advanced civilization before a catastrophic pole shift caused it to freeze over. This theory relies on the idea that the Earth's crust can slip suddenly over its interior, moving entire continents to different latitudes. However, there is no scientific evidence for such rapid pole shifts, and ice core data shows that Antarctica has been covered by ice for millions of years. The Antarctic Atlantis theory remains firmly in the realm of pseudoscience. Fact 38. The Black Sea has been proposed as a location for Atlantis based on evidence that it experienced catastrophic flooding at the end of the last ice age. Around 5500 BCE, rising sea levels may have caused the Mediterranean to break through the Bosporus Strait, flooding the freshwater lake that existed where the Black Sea is today. The flood would have been devastating to any communities living on the lake's shores. Some researchers have suggested that memories of this flood became incorporated into various flood myths, including perhaps the story of Atlantis. Archaeological exploration of the Black Sea floor has revealed ancient shorelines but no evidence of a major civilization. Fact 39. Ireland has been proposed as Atlantis by some researchers who note similarities between Plato's description and Irish geography and mythology. Ireland lies beyond the Pillars of Hercules from a Mediterranean perspective, is roughly the size Plato describes, and has a rich mythological tradition including stories of magical islands beneath the waves. The ancient Irish were skilled metalworkers with access to gold and copper. However, Ireland was never destroyed in a catastrophe matching Plato's description, and the parallels between Plato's Atlantis and Celtic Ireland seem superficial at best. Fact 40. The island of Cyprus has been suggested as a possible Atlantis location by the American researcher Robert Sarmast. He noted that Cyprus sits on an underwater plateau that extends south of the island and suggested that a large portion of this plateau sank beneath the waves after the last ice age. Sarmast claimed to have found evidence of rectangular structures on the sea floor using sonar imaging. However, his findings have not been verified by independent researchers, and most archaeologists consider the Cyprus theory unsubstantiated. Cyprus was certainly home to ancient civilizations, but there is no evidence that a major city sank beneath the sea. Fact 41. Indonesia and the sunken landmass of Sundaland have been proposed as the location of Atlantis by some researchers. During the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower, much of Indonesia was connected to mainland Asia by a large landmass called Sundaland. As sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age, Sundaland was gradually flooded, turning mountains into islands and forcing human populations to migrate. This flooding might have inspired flood myths in various cultures. However, the flooding of Sundaland was gradual, taking thousands of years, not the sudden catastrophe Plato describes. Fact 42. The idea that Atlantis might have been a highly advanced technological civilization, perhaps even more advanced than our own, emerged in the late 19th century and has become a staple of Atlantis mythology. Some theorists claim that the Atlanteans possessed technologies including electricity, aircraft, and nuclear power. They suggest that ancient monuments around the world, from the pyramids of Egypt to the stone heads of Easter Island, were built with Atlantean technology or by Atlantean refugees. There is no archaeological evidence to support these claims, and the monuments in question can be explained by the ingenuity and labor of the cultures that actually built them. Fact 43. The psychic Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, gave numerous readings about Atlantis in the early 20th century. According to Cayce, Atlantis was a technologically advanced civilization that destroyed itself through misuse of powerful crystals that could harness energy from the sun and earth. Casey predicted that evidence of Atlantis would be discovered near Bimini in the Bahamas in 1968 or 69. The discovery of the Bimini Road in 1968 seemed to validate this prophecy, though geologists have explained the road as a natural formation. Casey's Atlantis readings remain popular among those interested in alternative history and spirituality. Fact 44. The Theosophical Society, a spiritual organization founded in 1875, incorporated Atlantis into its teachings about human spiritual evolution. According to Theosophical doctrine, humanity has passed through several root races, with the Atlanteans being the fourth. The Atlanteans were said to have possessed psychic powers and spiritual knowledge that degenerated as they became more materialistic. The destruction of Atlantis was a karmic consequence of this spiritual decline. Theosophical ideas about Atlantis influenced many subsequent esoteric and New Age interpretations of the legend. Fact 45. The Nazi regime in Germany took a disturbing interest in Atlantis as part of its promotion of Aryan racial mythology. Heinrich Himmler and the SS sponsored research into the supposed Atlantean origins of the Aryan race, connecting Atlantis to the mythical homeland of Thule. Expeditions were sent to Tibet and other locations searching for evidence of Atlantean civilization. This pseudoscientific racism had no basis in fact and has tainted Atlantis speculation with associations that legitimate researchers find repugnant. The Nazi misuse of the Atlantis myth is a reminder that legends can be twisted to serve harmful ideologies. Fact 46. Despite the lack of evidence for Atlantis, professional archaeologists continue to discover remarkable submerged sites that expand our understanding of prehistoric civilization. Off the coast of India, divers have found structures that may date back thousands of years to a time when sea levels were lower. In the Mediterranean, ancient ports and cities that were submerged by earthquakes or rising seas have been explored and mapped. These discoveries remind us that the sea has swallowed many human achievements, even if none of them match Plato's description of Atlantis. Fact 47. The ancient city of Dwarka off the coast of India has sometimes been called a real-life Atlantis. According to Hindu tradition, Dwarka was the legendary kingdom of the god Krishna, submerged by the sea after his death. Archaeological investigations have revealed stone structures underwater at this site, dating back perhaps 3,000 years. While some enthusiasts have claimed Dwarka as evidence for Atlantis-like lost civilizations, archaeologists interpret the site as a historical port city that was submerged by coastal changes over time, not a catastrophic destruction. Fact 48. The submerged city of Pavlopetri off the southern coast of Greece is one of the oldest submerged archaeological sites in the world. Dating back about 5,000 years to the Bronze Age, Pavlopetri contains streets, buildings, and tombs now lying under about 15 feet of water. The city was gradually submerged by tectonic activity over thousands of years. While not Atlantis, Pavlopetri demonstrates that sophisticated urban settlements did exist in the Mediterranean region during the period when Atlantis supposedly flourished, and that some of them did end up beneath the sea. Fact 49. The search for Atlantis has driven significant advances in underwater archaeology and remote sensing technology. The desire to find the lost city has motivated expeditions using sonar, satellite imagery, and diving equipment to explore the sea floor in countless locations. While Atlantis itself has never been found, these expeditions have discovered shipwrecks, ancient harbors, and submerged landscapes that have expanded our knowledge of the past. In this sense, The legend of Atlantis has contributed to science even if the city itself remains fictional. Fact 50. As you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine what it might be like to visit Atlantis in its golden age, before the catastrophe. The sun sparkles on the circular waterways that ring the central island, where boats carry merchants and visitors between the outer city and the temple at the heart. The air smells of salt and flowers. The walls shine with bronze and silver, and the great statue of Poseidon rises in the distance, his trident catching the light. Somewhere, musicians are playing, and the sound drifts across the water like a half-remembered dream. Fact 51. Plato's Atlantis was governed by 10 kings, all descended from Poseidon and Cleito. The island was divided into 10 portions, each ruled by one king, with the eldest king of the direct line of Atlas having precedence over the others. Every 5th or 6th year, the 10 kings would gather at the Temple of Poseidon to discuss matters of state, make judgments, and renew their commitment to the laws inscribed on a pillar of Orichalcum in the temple. Before their deliberations, they would hunt bulls that roamed freely in the temple grounds, catching them without weapons and sacrificing them over the sacred pillar. Fact 52. The laws of Atlantis, according to Plato, were inscribed by Poseidon himself on a pillar of Orichalcum kept in the central temple. These laws governed the relationships between the 10 kings, forbidding them from taking up arms against one another and requiring them to support each other against any threat. Decisions about war and other important matters required the consent of a majority of kings, with the royal house of Atlas holding a veto. This system of checks and balances resembles later Greek ideas about good government and may reflect Plato's own political philosophy rather than historical reality. Fact 53. The wealth of Atlantis was so great, according to Plato, that the kings could build massive walls, bridges, and harbors without straining their resources. The outer wall surrounding the entire city was coated with brass, the inner wall with tin, and the wall around the central citadel with orichalcum that gleamed like fire. The harbor was full of ships and merchants from around the world, and the noise and activity continued day and night. This picture of commercial prosperity resembles descriptions of great trading cities like Carthage or Alexandria more than it resembles any prehistoric settlement. Fact 54. The decline of Atlantis, in Plato's telling, was moral rather than technological. In the beginning, the Atlanteans were virtuous, despising wealth except as a burden and valuing friendship and excellence above material possessions. But as the divine nature they had inherited from Poseidon became diluted through intermarriage with mortals, they became greedy, corrupt, and aggressive. They began to conquer neighboring lands and lost the wisdom that had made them great. Their moral decline attracted the attention of Zeus, who decided to punish them as a lesson to humanity. Fact 55. The punishment of Atlantis is described at the end of the Critias dialogue, but the text breaks off just as Zeus is about to speak to the assembled gods. What exactly he planned to do, and whether the Atlanteans were given any chance to redeem themselves, remains unknown because the dialogue was never completed. The abrupt ending has puzzled scholars for centuries. Some believe Plato died before finishing the work. Others suggest he abandoned it deliberately or that the ending was lost. The missing conclusion adds to the mystery of Atlantis and allows readers to imagine their own endings. Fact 56. The story of Atlantis has obvious parallels to other flood myths found around the world. The biblical story of Noah, the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, and flood stories from cultures as distant as India and the Americas all tell of a catastrophic deluge that destroyed an earlier civilization. Some researchers have suggested that these myths preserve memories of real flooding events at the end of the last ice age, when rising seas transformed coastlines around the world. Whether Atlantis belongs to this tradition of flood mythology or is a purely philosophical invention remains debated. Fact 57. The Greek myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha describes a flood sent by Zeus to destroy corrupt humanity, with only the virtuous Deucalion and his wife surviving by building an ark. This myth, clearly related to Near Eastern flood stories, was well known to Plato and his audience. The story of Atlantis might be seen as a variation on this theme, with an entire civilization rather than an individual being judged and destroyed. The moral framework is the same in both stories. The gods punish human hubris and corruption, sparing only the virtuous. Fact 58. The victory of Athens over Atlantis in Plato's story serves an obvious patriotic and philosophical purpose. The ancient Athenians, fighting alone after their allies desert them, defeat the mightiest empire the world has ever seen through virtue, discipline, and courage. This idealized Athens bears little resemblance to the historical city, which was plagued by political conflicts, imperial overreach, and eventual defeat in the Peloponnesian War. Plato may have been using the Atlantis story to critique the Athens of his own time by contrasting it with a better version of itself. Fact 59. Plato was deeply critical of Athenian democracy, which he blamed for the execution of his teacher Socrates in 399 BCE. His political philosophy, expressed in dialogues like The Republic, favored rule by philosopher kings over democratic decision-making. The idealized ancient Athens in the Atlantis story resembles Plato's ideal state more than historical Athens, with its strict social classes, communal living for the guardian class, and subordination of individual desires to the common good. The Atlantis story may thus be read as political philosophy dressed in mythological clothing. Fact 60. The contrast between Athens and Atlantis in Plato's account mirrors his broader philosophical contrasts between virtue and vice, wisdom and ignorance, moderation and excess. Athens represents the life of the soul guided by reason, while Atlantis represents the life of the body driven by appetite. Athens is small, disciplined, and content with simplicity. Atlantis is vast, luxurious, and constantly seeking more. The destruction of Atlantis and the survival of Athens illustrate which way of life is sustainable and which leads to disaster. Fact 61. Plato's description of Atlantis includes details that seem to reflect knowledge of civilizations beyond the Greek world. The alternating rings of water and land around the central city resemble descriptions of eastern cities like Ecbatana, the capital of the Median Empire, which Greek historians described as having concentric walls of different colors. The elephants, abundant resources, and vast size of Atlantis recall Greek knowledge of India and Africa. Plato may have combined features of various exotic places into his portrait of Atlantis. Fact 62. The number symbolism in Plato's account of Atlantis is complex and may carry philosophical meaning. The number 10, the number of kings and divisions of the island, was sacred in Pythagorean philosophy as the number of perfection. The 5 pairs of twins born to Poseidon and Cleito may represent the 5 senses doubled, or the 5 elements of ancient Greek philosophy. The measurements Plato gives for the canals, walls, and racetrack may encode mathematical relationships that meant something to ancient readers. Modern attempts to decode this symbolism have produced various interpretations, but no consensus. Fact 63. Let your mind drift now to the moment of Atlantis's destruction. The earth begins to tremble. Cracks appear in the gleaming walls. The great temple sways, and the statue of Poseidon topples from its pedestal. People run through the streets, but there is nowhere to run. The sea rises, not gradually but all at once, a wall of water higher than the towers, sweeping across the outer rings of the city, carrying away ships and buildings and people and everything that the Atlanteans had built over thousands of years. And then silence. Just the sea, the endless sea, closing over the place where Atlantis had been. Fact 64. Stories of sunken cities are found in many cultures around the world. The Welsh legend of Cantorar Gwaelod tells of a land beneath Cardigan Bay lost to flooding through human carelessness. Breton folklore describes the city of Ys, swallowed by the sea after its princess opened the gates that held back the water. Japanese legend tells of Mu, a Pacific continent that sank beneath the waves. These stories may preserve memories of real coastal flooding, or they may reflect universal human fascination with the idea of lost places hidden beneath the water. Fact 65. The legend of Mu was largely invented by the 19th century writer Augustus Le Plongeon, who claimed to have decoded Mayan inscriptions that told of a continent in the Pacific that had sunk about 12,000 years ago. Le Plongeon's translations were entirely fictitious, but the idea of Mu was popularized by the writer James Churchward in a series of books published in the 1920s and 30s. Churchward claimed to have learned about Mu from secret tablets in India and presented elaborate theories about Muan civilization, religion, and science. Like Atlantis, Mu has no basis in geological or archaeological evidence. Fact 66. The lost continent of Lemuria was originally proposed by 19th century scientists to explain the distribution of lemur fossils in Madagascar and India. Before the theory of continental drift was developed, some scientists hypothesized a land bridge or continent in the Indian Ocean that had since sunk, allowing animals to migrate between Africa and Asia. This scientific hypothesis was later adopted by theosophists and other esoteric groups who imagined Lemuria as the home of an ancient spiritual civilization. The theory of plate tectonics has since explained the distribution of fossils without requiring lost continents. Fact 67. The ocean floor has been extensively mapped using sonar and satellite technology, and there is no evidence of sunken continents in any ocean. The Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans are floored by oceanic crust, which is geologically distinct from continental crust and much younger. If large land masses had existed in these oceans within the last 100,000 years, we would expect to find continental crust, sedimentary deposits, and other evidence. None exists. Whatever Atlantis was, it was not a large continent that sank beneath the ocean. Fact 68. Despite the lack of physical evidence, Atlantis continues to fascinate millions of people worldwide. Thousands of books have been written about Atlantis, ranging from serious scholarly analyses to wild speculation. Documentary films explore various Atlantis theories, and websites catalog every proposed location and interpretation. The legend has inspired novels, films, television series, and video games. Something about the idea of a lost golden age, a perfect civilization destroyed by catastrophe, speaks to deep human longings and fears. Fact 69. The appeal of Atlantis may lie in what it says about human nature and human history. The story tells us that greatness is possible, that humans can build magnificent civilizations, but that greatness carries the seeds of its own destruction. Wealth corrupts, power tempts, and even the most advanced society can fall if it loses its moral foundations. This is a message that resonates across cultures and centuries Perhaps because history provides so many examples of civilizations that rose, flourished, and fell. Fact 70. Atlantis has become a symbol of what we have lost or what we might lose. In an age of environmental crisis, the story of a civilization destroyed by natural catastrophe feels especially relevant. In an age of political division and moral uncertainty, the story of a society that lost its way feels like a warning. Atlantis is a mirror in which we see our own anxieties about the future and our nostalgia for a simpler past. This may be why the legend endures when so many other ancient stories have been forgotten. Fact 71. The search for Atlantis is, in some ways, a search for meaning. If Atlantis existed, then human history is longer and stranger than we thought, full of lost chapters waiting to be recovered. The past becomes a source of wonder rather than a collection of dry facts. The world becomes enchanted again, full of mysteries and secrets. This desire for enchantment in a disenchanted world may explain why people continue to believe in Atlantis despite the lack of evidence, and why new Atlantis theories continue to be proposed and debated. Fact 72. Science fiction and fantasy writers have found Atlantis an endlessly productive setting. Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea features a visit to the ruins of Atlantis. Arthur Conan Doyle's The Maracot Deep involves an expedition to a surviving Atlantean colony at the bottom of the sea. More recent works have imagined Atlantis as everything from a superhero's homeland to an alien outpost to a center of magical power. The flexibility of the Atlantis concept allows it to be adapted to virtually any fictional purpose. Fact 73. The Disney animated film Atlantis, The Lost Empire, released in 2001, introduced the legend to a new generation of viewers. The film imagined Atlantis as an advanced civilization hidden beneath the ocean, powered by a mysterious crystal energy source. While taking many liberties with Plato's account, the film captured the sense of wonder and mystery that surrounds the Atlantis legend. Its steampunk aesthetic and multicultural cast of explorers reflected early 20th century adventure stories and helped keep the Atlantis myth alive in popular culture. Fact 74. The video game series Assassin's Creed features Atlantis as part of its elaborate fictional history involving an ancient civilization called the ISU. In this version, Atlantis was a city of the ISU that sank due to geological instability, with its ruins eventually discovered by the player character. Video games like this demonstrate how Atlantis can be incorporated into larger fictional universes, becoming one element of an extended mythology that spans human history. Fact 75. Comic books have featured Atlantis as the home of various superhero characters, most notably Aquaman in DC Comics and Namor the Submariner in Marvel Comics. These fictional versions of Atlantis survived the ancient catastrophe and continue to exist as underwater kingdoms, sometimes allied with and sometimes hostile to the surface world. The idea of Atlanteans living beneath the waves, preserving ancient knowledge and power, reflects one of the most persistent elements of the Atlantis myth, the hope that the lost civilization might somehow have survived. Fact 76. As you rest here in the peaceful depths, imagine that Atlantis did survive somewhere beneath the waves. In crystal domes beneath the ocean, descendants of the original Atlanteans go about their lives, tending gardens of coral and kelp, raising fish in great underwater pastures, preserving the wisdom of their ancestors while the world above moves through its cycles of rise and fall. They remember the catastrophe, remember the pride that brought it about, and have built a more humble civilization in its wake. Perhaps they watch us still, wondering if we will repeat their mistakes. Fact 77. Modern ocean exploration has revealed an underwater world of extraordinary richness and strangeness. Hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean support ecosystems entirely independent of sunlight, based on chemical energy from the Earth's interior. Vast plains of sediment stretch across the ocean floor, accumulated over millions of years. Submarine mountains rise miles from the seabed without breaking the surface. Trenches plunge to depths where the pressure would crush a human body instantly. The ocean is far more mysterious than any lost continent, hiding wonders we are only beginning to discover. Fact 78. Some researchers have suggested that the Atlantis story might preserve memories of the catastrophic flooding that occurred at the end of the last ice age. Between about 15,000 and 7,000 years ago, sea levels rose over 300 feet as the great ice sheets melted, flooding vast areas of previously habitable land. Entire landscapes that our ancestors knew were submerged, becoming the continental shelves that now lie beneath shallow coastal waters. Communities that lived on these coastal plains would have been displaced or destroyed. Could their descendants have preserved memories of this flooding, eventually crystallized into the legend of Atlantis? Fact 79. The flooding of Doggerland, the land that once connected Britain to continental Europe, is one example of Ice Age sea level rise that affected human populations. Until about 8,000 years ago, Doggerland was a rich landscape of forests, marshes, and rivers, home to Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. As sea levels rose, Doggerland gradually shrank and was eventually completely submerged, becoming the North Sea. Fishing trawlers still sometimes bring up Mesolithic artifacts and mammoth bones from what was once dry land. The people of Doggerland would have experienced their homeland slowly disappearing beneath the waves over generations. Fact 80. The Black Sea Deluge hypothesis suggests that the Black Sea was a freshwater lake until about 5500 BCE, when rising Mediterranean sea levels breached the natural dam at the Bosporus and flooded the basin. If this flooding occurred rapidly, as some researchers believe, it would have been catastrophic for communities living on the lake's shores. Some have suggested that this event inspired flood myths throughout the Near East, including possibly the story of Noah's flood and perhaps the legend of Atlantis. The hypothesis remains controversial, with some evidence suggesting the flooding was gradual rather than sudden. Fact 81. The Mediterranean itself experienced a catastrophic flooding event about 5 million years ago, when the Strait of Gibraltar opened and the Atlantic Ocean poured into the Mediterranean basin, which had largely dried up during a period called the Messinian Salinity Crisis. This Zanclean flood filled the Mediterranean basin in a geologically short time, perhaps as little as a few thousand years. Of course, this event occurred millions of years before humans existed and cannot be connected to the Atlantis legend. But it demonstrates that catastrophic flooding has shaped our planet's geography in dramatic ways. Fact 82. Ancient peoples were well aware that the sea could swallow land. The Greeks knew of cities that had been submerged by earthquakes, and Egyptian records mention lands that had been lost to the Mediterranean. This knowledge would have made Plato's story of Atlantis plausible to his original audience. They knew that the sea was hungry, that what was land today might be water tomorrow. The legend of Atlantis gave mythical expression to a very real fear. Fact 83. Tsunamis have destroyed coastal communities throughout recorded history. The tsunami that struck Lisbon in 1755, triggered by a massive earthquake, killed tens of thousands of people and destroyed much of the city. The Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 killed over 200,000 people across multiple countries. The Japanese tsunami of 2011 caused the Fukushima nuclear disaster and reminded the world how vulnerable coastal civilization remains. If ancient peoples experienced similar disasters, they would surely have incorporated them into their mythology. Fact 84. The Storegga slides were massive underwater landslides that occurred off the coast of Norway about 8,000 years ago. These landslides generated tsunamis that struck the coasts of Norway, Scotland, and the Shetland Islands with waves possibly over 80 feet high. The Mesolithic inhabitants of these coasts would have experienced sudden destruction from the sea, their settlements washed away in moments. Events like this, repeated over thousands of years in various locations, would have taught ancient peoples to fear the ocean's power. Fact 85. The idea of Atlantis as a warning against hubris connects it to one of the central themes of Greek mythology and tragedy. The Greeks believed that excessive pride, called hubris, inevitably attracted divine punishment, called nemesis. This pattern appears repeatedly in Greek myths, from the story of Icarus who flew too close to the sun to the tale of Niobe who boasted of her children and saw them killed by the gods. Atlantis fits perfectly into this moral framework, a civilization that achieved greatness, became arrogant, and was destroyed by divine judgment. Fact 86. The environmental message some modern readers find in the Atlantis story may not have been intended by Plato, but it resonates with contemporary concerns. Atlantis exploited its natural resources extensively, building, farming, and mining on a massive scale. Its destruction can be read as nature striking back against human overreach. In an age of climate change and environmental degradation, this interpretation makes Atlantis feel relevant in ways Plato could never have anticipated. Fact 87. The search for Atlantis has sometimes led to genuine archaeological discoveries, even if Atlantis itself remains unfound. Researchers investigating Atlantis claims have explored underwater sites, analyzed satellite imagery, and conducted surveys that have contributed to our knowledge of the ancient world. The Atlantis legend motivates people to look for lost civilizations, and sometimes they find things worth finding, even if those things are not Atlantis. Fact 88. The persistence of the Atlantis legend despite lack of evidence tells us something about human psychology. We are drawn to mysteries, to hidden knowledge, to the idea that the official story is incomplete. Atlantis offers an alternative history, more exciting and more meaningful than the conventional account of human civilization's gradual development. The appeal of this alternative history seems to outweigh the evidence against it for many people. Fact 89. Skeptics argue that the burden of proof lies with those who claim Atlantis existed. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and no such evidence has been produced despite centuries of searching. The most parsimonious explanation, they say, is that Plato invented Atlantis as a philosophical allegory, just as he invented other myths in his dialogues. Until solid evidence is found, they argue, Atlantis should be classified as fiction, not as a mystery awaiting solution. Fact 90. Believers respond that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The ocean is vast and largely unexplored. Ancient sites are regularly discovered that overturn previous assumptions about what was possible in prehistory. Göbekli Tepe, dating back 12,000 years, proved that sophisticated monumental architecture existed thousands of years earlier than archaeologists had believed possible. Who knows what other surprises await discovery? Until the ocean floor has been thoroughly explored, they say, we cannot rule out the existence of Atlantis. Fact 91. Whether Atlantis was real or imaginary, Its influence on human culture has been very real indeed. The legend has shaped how we think about lost civilizations, alternative history, and the relationship between humanity and nature. It has inspired art, literature, science, and spirituality. It has been used to support political ideologies ranging from democracy to fascism. Atlantis may be the most influential story from ancient Greece after the myths of the Olympian gods, and its influence shows no signs of fading. Fact 92. The future may bring new evidence that sheds light on the Atlantis question. Advances in underwater archaeology, remote sensing technology, and computational analysis of ancient texts may reveal things we cannot currently imagine. Perhaps a genuine lost civilization waits beneath the waves, not Plato's Atlantis exactly, but something that inspired the legend. Or perhaps we will eventually prove beyond reasonable doubt that Atlantis was purely Plato's invention. Either way, the search for truth about the past continues. Fact 93. As you drift towards sleep, consider that perhaps the most important truth about Atlantis is not whether it existed, but what it means to us. The story speaks to our hopes and fears, our sense of wonder, and our awareness of mortality. It reminds us that nothing lasts forever, that even the greatest achievements can be swept away. It encourages us to value what we have while we have it, to build wisely, to live virtuously, and to remember that we are small creatures on a vast and ancient planet. Fact 94. The ocean that covers most of our world is still largely unknown. We have better maps of Mars than of the Earth's ocean floor. Creatures live in the deep sea that we have never seen, in ecosystems we do not understand. The pressure and darkness of the depths have kept their secrets well. When we imagine Atlantis lying somewhere beneath the waves, we are acknowledging how much of our own planet remains mysterious to us, how much there is still to discover. Fact 95. Perhaps everyone who dreams of Atlantis is looking for something different. Some seek lost treasure or advanced technology. Some seek spiritual wisdom or a connection to ancient times. Some simply enjoy the thrill of a good mystery. The Atlantis legend is flexible enough to accommodate all these desires, which may explain its enduring popularity. Whatever you seek in the depths, the journey itself has value. Fact 96. Let the waves of relaxation wash over you now, gentle and warm. The lost city of Atlantis may or may not lie somewhere beneath the sea, but in your dreams, all places are possible. You can walk the streets of the sunken city, touch the Orichalcum walls, hear the voices of people who lived thousands of years ago. Dreams have no boundaries, no limitations. In dreams, Atlantis lives forever. Fact 97. Plato ended his dialogues with myth because he believed that some truths could not be expressed through reason alone. The truth of Atlantis may be one of these deeper truths, not a literal account of a physical place, but a story about what it means to be human, to build civilizations, to reach for greatness while remaining humble before forces greater than ourselves. In this sense, Atlantis is true whether it existed or not. Fact 98. The search for Atlantis continues, as it has for over 2,000 years. New expeditions set out, new theories are proposed, new books are written. Each generation finds new meaning in the old story, new reasons to keep looking. Perhaps someday the search will end in discovery. Perhaps it will go on forever. Either way, the journey matters more than the destination, and the questions we ask reveal as much as any answers we might find. Fact 99. And so we leave Atlantis where Plato left it, beneath the waves, beyond the pillars of Hercules, in that mysterious realm where history becomes legend and legend becomes dream. The great city sleeps in the silent darkness, its towers reaching toward a surface it will never see again, its secrets preserved in coral and sand. Perhaps it never existed at all. Perhaps it exists in every story we tell about lost golden ages and vanished wonders. Perhaps it exists right now, in this moment of peaceful rest, in the quiet space between waking and sleep, where all things are possible. Sleep now, dreamer. Let the ocean carry you to shores unknown, to cities that rise and fall with the tide of imagination. The mystery of Atlantis will wait for you, as it has waited for countless seekers before. When you wake, the world will still be here, ancient and mysterious, full of wonders yet to be discovered.
But for now, just rest.
Just breathe. Just dream of crystal towers beneath the waves, and let the lost city sing you to sleep.